Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Got a Minute More, the podcast extension of our Got a Minute reviews. YouTube, IGTV, Facebook, whatever you want to call it, show. We review movies in 60 seconds time, which, as you can imagine, makes things very difficult for us. It's tough to get all of those thoughts into about 240 words, I think is what we're up to about now, Kevin.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I usually average 240, 250 just because I like to push as much as I can.
You just like to make me trim where I can, because there's no way I can possibly voice all that in 60 seconds. I'm just not good enough. I'll get there one day. Anyway, that's stuff you can find on GotAMinuteReviews.com. Also follow us on Facebook, Got a Minute Reviews, Instagram, Got a Minute Reviews. That's where you'll find us. We're going to start by taking a look back at some of the movies that we watched in November. Let's start with one that I didn't get a chance to see, Kevin. Some of you might know this. I was laid out for about 3 weeks with sciatica, which I don't recommend getting sciatica if you can avoid it in any way, shape, or form. Highly recommend avoiding it. It did not allow me to sit in a movie theater for 2.5 hours to watch Suspiria, which is first on our list today. So, Kevin, tell us about Suspiria.
So, Suspiria, obviously, if you don't know, is a remake of one of the most legendary Italian horror movies of all time, by the same name, obviously, directed by Dario Argento. The original is very famous for the style that it was shot in. There's very interesting and creative use of colors, but the actual story kinda is lacking. Of the trilogy of movies, the Three Mothers trilogy, it's by far the best, but none of them are particularly good on an actual story element. So Luca Guadagnino, I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Nailed it.
Who directed Call Me By Your Name, which was nominated for an Academy Award last year.
Deservedly.
Is the director here, and he added over an hour to the runtime of this movie to try and actually flesh out the story and make it make sense or make it land with more impact. And also, most of the story is completely changed. This is a completely different version of this movie. The characters are the same. The basic setting is the same. Basically, everything that happens in the movie is different. I was very much looking forward to it. I've been, as you know, horror is my favorite movie genre, and I've been really enjoying over the last several years now the kind of renaissance in high-end horror movies that's been going on this year. Also, a prime example with Hereditary, obviously. And I thought this was definitely not for everybody.
Right.
Nor
was the original, so I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, this is extremely slow. Extremely slow, extremely methodical. When it does get to moments, it's extremely graphic and violent and hard to watch. But I did think overall it was a much better telling of this story than Argento's version. Argento's will always live on because of the style of it, because of what it meant to horror movies at the time that it came out. But I do think this is a better movie than Argento's version.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super high on Argento's version of this movie. I think this has more. I'm trying to come up with the proper wording here. This has more atmosphere to it than I think Argento does. What I think this movie does really well is, if you're willing to go with the pace of it, which, as I said, is very, very slow, very methodical, and it's very it's deliberately off-putting, and it's very hard to come to terms with why people are doing what they're doing, who's like there's not really a rooting interest in any of the characters, to be honest. They're not all of them are good people or likable in any real way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just kind of about watching just this really dark story unfold in a very slow pace, and wondering where the payoff is ultimately going. And I think once you get to the payoff, we've seen several movies this year that I think fit a similar tone as this, where the ending is very bizarre but very brave. Annihilation springs to mind as a prime example. That's a very weird ending, and not everyone's going to be with what they're doing at the end of that movie. But I think it's very brave to end a movie deliberately as abstract as that. And this isn't abstract. This is a completely different thing than being abstract. But the ending here is very it is going to extremely split audiences. No one's going to watch this and have like a shrug of their shoulders. They're either going to really love where the movie goes at the end or really hate where the movie goes at the end.
Is it as ambiguous as Annihilation is in terms of like what you can read out of the ending or what you can read out of the movie overall as a result of the ending?
No, there's no real ambiguous. This isn't an ambiguous ending. This is just a very bizarre and over the top ending to this movie.
Well, I do need to see it. It's something that's definitely been on my list, and I wanted to go to that one as well. Just found out today, as we're recording this, it comes out in January 29th, I believe, on Blu-ray, so I don't have to wait too long, thankfully. Just a little over a month away till it hits Blu-ray, and I assume digital before that as well. So definitely something that I do need to check out. But man, it's 2.5 hours long. That is like ridiculously long for a horror / mystery type movie.
Yeah, and I will say, like, the movie isn't perfect. It's nowhere near as good as Hereditary was earlier this year. This movie really does feel at times 2.5 hours long because of the pacing of it. There are times where you're gonna look at your watch and be like, "Oh my God, we're still only like halfway through this. How is this movie this long?"
And that's the kind of thing that you couldn't say about Hereditary too, is because Hereditary kind of felt like 3 movies in one. There was always kind of like a reset of the watch, almost, at least in your head, anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And this one takes a very different approach to that, where it almost doesn't feel like a movie for like 45 minutes, where it's just a bunch of random scenes basically, and then the movie will start to build out of those scenes. But for the first 45 minutes, there's very little scary about it. There's very little outside of the prologue to the movie, like the pre-credit scene. There's not a lot that's scary in the first 45 minutes. There's a lot of really cool cinematography. There's a lot of really good acting in the movie. Everyone is great. Obviously, if you don't know, Tilda Swinton plays both the villain of the movie and the male lead of the movie.
Right.
And is outstanding in both parts.
Which I didn't know until reading about it just shortly after it was released too. She's never not good.
And then I feel like I think the last time we got together for this podcast, we were talking about Bad Times at El Royale, and we specifically gave Dakota Johnson a shout out for her role there because it was the first time either of us had actually seen her in anything. So she is the female lead of this movie, and she's very good, and it's a very specific kind of good that I find very interesting. There's several years ago when Jennifer Aniston won the Academy Award. Julianne Moore won the Academy Award for what was that movie called? Still Alice.
Yes.
I thought that year Reese Witherspoon in her, and I'm Wild, I think it was called.
Yeah, Wild.
The hiking movie. I thought she was better than Julianne Moore was. I thought that was a very interesting, because her role was also extremely physical. It wasn't just the acting, it was the physical element that she had taken on. And Dakota Johnson does the same thing here, because there are extreme long take sequences of her doing these dance choreographies, and she's absolutely fucking brilliant. And it's extremely impressive how good she is in every aspect, not just the dramatic acting, but in the actual physical delivery of her character.
Yeah, it takes some serious commitment and practice. You know, the funny thing, I remember seeing trailers and posters for Suspiria and thinking that was Andrea Riseborough, and not Dakota Johnson. I think it's the red hair. When Dakota Johnson has the red hair, she looks very much like Andrea Riseborough. So that's just me. I'm just not paying attention. Next up was a movie that I think both of us were very much looking forward to, which kind of fell a little flat for us. You and I are both fans of Queen. Bohemian Rhapsody. So much good and so much bad at the same time.
Yeah, I believe I wrote this for the YouTube channel.
Oh, you did? Because I didn't write anything for about a month. It was kind of great, but at the same time also kind of shitty.
Yeah, and I basically said, in the moment, it's Queen music. It's a really good Rami Malek performance. It's competently directed. The rest of the cast is pretty good. In the moment, you're going to love it. And then once you start to mull over some of the decisions they made, some of the ways they tell the story or altered the story of Queen,
the facts,
and look, like I told you when we were talking about the movie, there are two versions of doing this, right? So the fact that they frame the movie where Freddie Mercury is diagnosed with AIDS a week before their Live Aid performance, I don't have a problem with that, actually. I don't think that's unfair. I think that's perfectly fine to say Live Aid is the culmination of our movie. His diagnosis and illness is such a big part of his life story. So we're going to do this, and we're going to frame Live Aid as him triumphing over HIV.
Right.
I don't think that's unfair. What I do think is unfair is the other elements that they do and the other choices that they make in the storytelling, where they're almost painting him as a villain in his own biopic.
Yeah, very true. I mean, there's several scenes where, especially the one montage. So we'll have to get into spoiler territory on this one in a way that we didn't in Suspiria. And let's just say spoilers right now. A couple of montages, or at least the one montage, let's say, that really just sort of paints the whole gay lifestyle, bisexual lifestyle, as this seedy, terrible underground thing that takes Freddie away from this pure life that he was, on the path for, at least.
Yeah, so much of this is hard to parse, but that particular scene, whoever decided on the way that's edited, that is an abject failure. Oh, yeah. Having the band recording the song "Another One Bites the Dust" as he's going through this like seedy, really cliche, like red lighting, guys in like leather fetish masks.
It reminded me of the gay nightclub in whatever Police Academy movie. Was it the first or the second one?
I
the
can't
Blue
remember.
Oyster Club. Who can remember those movies? That's all I remember about that. It was that stereotypical image of the 1980s gay scene where it's just all leather and red lights and, darkness. And, it's so seedy and scary.
Yeah, so whoever put that together and had the song "Another One Bites the Dust" as he's walking further and further into that's just an abject failure. Like that's bad editing.
And there's a lot of on the nose stuff like that in this movie too. Just going back to the AIDS diagnosis thing. Do you remember the song that was playing over that was "Who Wants to Live Forever" from the movie Highlander, which kind of implies that he wrote that song in response to his AIDS diagnosis, when in fact it was purely written for the movie, which came out, I think, like a year or two before the diagnosis as well. Little stuff like that, just really on the nose.
Yeah, so I mean that little montage is by far the worst part of the movie. Like that is unquestionably a mistake in
Yes.
editing. The other things is the story devices like having Freddie Mercury decide to go solo and break up Queen when he was actually the third member of that band that released a solo album, and the band never actually broke up.
Which is especially frustrating when you learn how much input the band had on the script of this movie, and how involved they were in that early portion of the production or pre-production or whatever. It kind of points to lies being told, by other people, not necessarily the band members, but I'll say the band members, about Freddie. It's really strange that they would choose to do that.
And there are other things as well. Like I guess we can't really say because we don't really know much about their relationship, but the way Paul Prenter is presented in this movie,
oh man,
is essentially as like a comic book supervillain.
Yeah.
And I sincerely doubt he was that over the top evil in person. Yes. In the end, he did something terrible to Freddie Mercury. He went to the tabloids after they broke up and basically outed him and outed a lot about his personal life.
Right.
That's unforgivably bad. But I don't think he was this cartoon supervillain that was trying to hoard him to himself and basically like pushing everyone else away, like the scene with Aidan Gillen's character, the agent.
The agent.
Where he kind of sets him up to make sure that Freddie turns on him and gets him fired. And like, there's just a whole bunch of stuff like that where it's like, I mean, I don't know that he didn't do that, but I have a hard time believing that dude was that just pure evil like that.
Well, that's the thing too. Like the other stuff that we know was not true. The thing that you bring up about him being the third member to go solo, and the band is freaking out about him breaking up the band because he wants to go solo. That kind of stuff, those kinds of fudging of the facts, call into question everything else that is brought up in this movie that is, sort of shady and questionable and that we don't know in the first place. You have a hard time trusting the movie because of things like that.
Exactly. It's a matter of credibility, right? And it loses credibility on the stuff we know. So when it presents Paul in that light, it's kind of hard to not see it as a framing device from the band, as if like Paul Prenter is Yoko Ono.
Yeah. Yeah, not necessarily even the band, but just it's almost like the studio even, just needed a villain for the piece because there really isn't one otherwise, except Freddie in some strange ways, but that's a whole other thing.
I mean, I guess it's certainly possible that it is just that it is an innocent, like lazy storytelling device to say we need just a villain. So we're going to take this guy who no one really knows that much about, and we're going to, except for the fact that he did something bad.
Yeah.
And we're just going to paint him as the villain of the entire movie.
Right. Anyway, there are a lot of positives as well. As you said, Rami Malek, absolutely phenomenal as Freddie Mercury. The attention to detail in, the performances that he gives, and not only that, in the production as well of, especially the Live Aid performance, which, as you say, is the culmination of the entire movie. That is the climax. It's incredible. I went home immediately after watching the movie and put on the Queen Rocks Live Aid, or Queen Rocks Montreal disc, which includes the Live Aid performance, and was just blown away. I wanted to see, there was one detail in particular that just blew me away. The placement of the water and beer cups on Freddie's piano on the stage at Wembley is exactly the same in the movie as it is in real life. And I was like, wait, I actually went and checked that. I said, wait a second, was that beer can right? Yes, it was right there. Like just stuff like that. But that to me also points to just like how frustrating that they were so careful with that stuff, and it's kind of bothersome that they weren't so careful with the facts.
And it depends on the movie, and it depends on the person how big an issue this is, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the movie's sitting at an 8.4 out of 10 on IMDb right now as we record this. So clearly, you and I are in the minority on this.
Yeah, but so what I think is, like, it depends on who it is. Like, you can take liberties in certain places, but when you're telling the story of someone who means as much as Freddie Mercury did to the LGBT community, to people who dealt with HIV during that time frame, he meant so much to so many people. I think you really need to be careful about the way you're painting it. And at times, this movie could be interpreted, if you wanted to be not unfair, if you wanted to be hard-nosed about the way you interpreted this movie, you could certainly say that the movie presents his homosexuality as the thing that brought him down.
Right.
And that is a huge problem narratively.
All right, so moving on from Bohemian Rhapsody to a film that kind of came out of nowhere for me. I had no idea that Steve McQueen, the director of 12 Years a Slave, was making another movie, because he had been gone since basically 12 Years a Slave. A movie called Widows, which has an absolutely phenomenal cast and really, really delivers the goods in the kind of crime thriller genre.
Yeah, I really loved this. I thought, Steve McQueen, this is his fourth movie I've seen. I'm not 100% sure if he's made any others outside of those four. I don't believe he has.
I don't think features he has, no.
Yeah, so Hunger and Shame, and then 12 Years a Slave, which was obviously the Academy Award darling, and now this, and all four of his movies are just show an incredible knack for filmmaking. Everything is as it should be. Soundtrack, cinematography, acting. He gets the most out of every single aspect of filmmaking, and I really enjoyed this. I really, really liked it.
Yeah, I only saw this one yesterday myself, so it's still pretty fresh for me too. Incredible performances from especially the titular widows, Viola Davis, Elizabeth Debicki, Michelle Rodriguez. Something that kind of surprised me, I thought she was going to be in the movie more. It was Cynthia Erivo, who you know that I love from Bad Times at the El Royale. I thought she was going to be in the movie a little bit more, so I was a little disappointed not to see her as much. But just a phenomenal cast, all giving fantastic performances. And Viola Davis, as you said in the review, absolutely the backbone of this movie.
Yeah, obviously, and I mean, she's obviously the most accomplished of the main cast. I mean, there Certainly. Are some like supporting actors who have obviously more accomplishments, but of the main cast, she is the most accomplished. And I mean, she's basically always brilliant. I mean, Suicide Squad aside, she's pretty brilliant.
I mean, sadly, no one was allowed to be brilliant in Suicide Squad.
No one survived Suicide Squad.
No, not at all.
Which I guess is ironic.
I mean, it's right there in the title. It was career suicide. Elizabeth Debicki, a breakout performance for her. Someone that really hasn't done a lot of features. She's best known for, at least on feature films, The Great Gatsby, and probably she was in the second Guardians of the Galaxy, right?
Yes.
She was the leader of, oh my God, I can't remember the name of it. The perfect beings that the Guardians kind of pulled one over on at the start of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really, really good in this movie as well. Let's get into spoiler territory now, because we've sort of danced around general stuff enough. But sure. John Bernthal's character is her husband in the start of the movie, very abusive, and her character arc is her coming out of that shell of being constantly the victim and finally becoming the victor. It's a terrible pun. I like it though.
Yeah. No, I'll definitely go with that.
Thanks, bud.
Yeah, I thought as far as story arcs go, I thought hers was the most interesting. Just the turn from being a victim to slowly realizing the power and control she can exert over every situation she's put into.
Hmm.
I mean, there's a great little sequence towards the middle of the movie where they're all given assignments to go do to plan the heist. Like
Right.
someone has to go do this, someone has to go acquire this. So she goes and she acquires her thing, and then she comes back, and someone else is saying, "I can't do what my job," and she just goes, "Just give it to me, I got this," and then just
Hmm.
goes off and solves that problem as well. And it's like that turn from her being this timid abuse victim to this complete controlling badass is a lot of fun to watch.
That was the one scene I think that it really turned around. That was on the train with Michelle Rodriguez's character, where
Yeah,
she sort of just says, "Yeah, I got this." I mean, there's a more explicit moment where she says, "I'm not going to be the victim anymore. I'm done with that," sort of thing. But I think it was that one particular moment on the train where you were like, "You go, girl,
yeah,
fucking just get in there, right?"
yeah, exactly. And what I did like about the movie as well. I mean, I guess for the sake of comparing this to Ocean's 8, what I did like about this was there was deep shades of gray throughout all of this.
Oh yeah,
No one is particularly a good person in this
no,
movie, on any side of the coin. And I thought that was a very interesting place to take it. There are like outright villains in the movie, and then there are people who are just different shades of gray,
yeah,
basically.
for sure. The dog is the most innocent character in the film by
And
far.
and I just happened to find this on Twitter the next day. That is also the dog from Game Night earlier this year.
That's pretty amazing. And I
Yeah,
probably should have caught that while I was watching because the dog is one of the highlights of that movie,
yeah,
in particular the blood scene.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If you haven't seen it, by the way, go back and watch Game Night. It's actually a really solid comedy, which came out of nowhere and kind of surprised us. The other person we
Yeah.
haven't talked about here for Widows. Oh, sorry, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna add on and say, yeah, I think Game Night is the best comedy movie released this year.
Yeah, I haven't seen one better myself, to be honest with you. Daniel Kaluuya is the other person that we need to talk about in this movie. And as you were speaking to the idea of a couple of characters being absolutely villainous and absolutely pure evil,
Uh-huh.
Daniel Kaluuya is certainly up there.
He is absolutely goddamn terrifying. The few scenes, there's a brief shot of it in the trailer, but the first time you really get a sense of his character is uh, on this basketball court
Hmm.
where he's having this interaction with people who work for him, and it is unbelievably intense and terrifying. And then the next time you see him, he's somehow ramped it up even worse, because the scene in the bowling alley is horrifying to watch.
So this is the one problem that I had with the movie is the next time that we see him is in one character's apartment. It's not to spoil everything, but it's in one character's apartment, and he sort of takes a back seat to the violence. And I was kind of disappointed in that because the previous two scenes had really like built him up as this incredibly violent person who could just go off. Not necessarily go off, but just kill in an instant. If I say go off, it sounds like he's not in control, and he always appears to be completely in control.
Right.
But he goes off just boom in an instant. You're alive, you're dead. The same thing happens at the bowling alley. Doesn't kill the character, but still badly wounds him, and it's a horrible scene to watch. And then in that third scene, I was kind of disappointed, kind of let down a little bit that we didn't see an escalation of that.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I think what made his character interesting is specifically in the first couple scenes was exactly what you kind of corrected on, was that he's not snapping, he's not playing this like
He's not a loose cannon, right? He's not.
Yeah, he's not a loose
insane.
cannon. He's not losing his mind. He's perfectly aware. He just has absolutely no feeling or absolutely no empathy or anything for this. So
he has
just
a completely
doing
different morality from us, let's say.
Yeah. He's just as casually as can be doing these horrifying things and acting like it's, washing dishes or something. It's just like I couldn't think of anything like super generic and mundane to be doing, so that's what I came up with.
That's pretty mundane. Doing laundry, which for me is piling up as I record this podcast, but whatever. Priorities. All right, so we both loved Widows. I think for me it's definitely in my top 10. I think you've got it pretty high in your top 10 now this year.
I do, yeah. My top 10 is getting pretty hard to decipher at this point, but it's still there.
It's going to take some sorting through for sure. Finally, a movie that I also just saw yesterday as I was playing catch up, Creed 2. Now, this is the sequel, of course, to Creed. That's why they put a 2 after it, which, of course, was directed by Ryan Coogler, who, I don't know if you guys heard about this, but he went on to make a little independent movie this year called what was it? Black Panther, where a little studio called Marvel ended up being, I think, the highest grossing Marvel film, domestically at least. So good for him and that little side project of his. Now he can get back to the Creed franchise, maybe? I don't know. He seems to be doing okay for himself. In any case, this movie was not directed by Ryan Coogler. It was Stephen Capel Jr., who, by the way, was also doing a little bit of research for this movie, is a friend of Ryan Coogler's. Actually studied at USC with him, film, of course. And when it came time for Ryan to hand over the reins because he was going to be busy with Black Panther, he recommended his friend. Met with Stallone, did Capel, met with MGM, and they both said, yeah, do it. And the film is perfectly fine.
Yeah, it is a perfectly adequate movie.
The word that I came up with, of course, for fans of The Simpsons was cromulent. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it. Okay, maybe there are a couple of things that are wrong with it, but there's nothing necessarily bad about it.
Yeah, there's nothing bad. There's just things that I really wish, because there are a lot of really good ideas in this movie.
Yes.
Unfortunately, the screenplay just does not make them land with the impact that I wish it did.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about the good stuff first. I mean, both Michael B. Jordan, who, Creed, the original Creed, sort of broke him and made him into the superstar that he is now, was phenomenal. He was great. And Tessa Thompson as well. This is another person who was kind of broken by the original movie. It is also very, very good. And their personal story, it's interesting to watch. But I don't think it's as interesting as the other story that is going on sort of off to the side.
Literally off to the side, because we don't get anywhere near enough of it. But yeah, the Ivan Drago and Victor Drago story, I think, is really fascinating, and there are a ton of really, really good ideas literally hidden in that. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't get enough time, and I think this is. We talked about the fact that Ryan Coogler is not involved here. Having seen Ryan Coogler's other work, I think this is the kind of movie where if he had been the person writing and directing this, I think this movie is absolutely great. And because it's not, because it's in, and no offense to Stephen Capel, who does a fine job, and this is a fine movie, but because it's not in the hands of someone with that talent of Ryan Coogler, this is not the movie it could have been, but it's fine.
See, that's the thing. So Ryan Coogler was both writer and director on the first movie. Capel does not have a writer credit, right? This was a screenplay by Sylvester Stallone and Jewel Taylor, with a story by, I can't remember the person's name, but it was a story by someone else who clearly just really wanted to bring Drago back because, I mean, come on, that's Rocky IV, in spite of its cheese, is still one of the most iconic pieces of the Rocky franchise. The whole Drago thing at the height of the Cold War in the mid 1980s was phenomenally fun to watch. And really, so let's get into spoiler territory here.
Just really briefly, I want to touch on that. I actually think bringing Drago back here could have been a stroke of genius in more astute hands. I think, you know, what the original movie Creed did was elevate this franchise that had kind of become campy in a lot of ways.
Kind of.
I mean, extremely campy,
like extremely
in every
campy.
way.
It was a parody of itself.
Yeah, and Creed really took it all back to basics and ground it in a way that the original Rocky is.
Right.
And we both agree that the original Creed should have been in several award nomination categories that it got snubbed for the year that it came out,
especially Best Picture and Best Director, let's say.
Yeah, and that elevating of the material, I think, is a great idea to take something like Rocky IV, which is supremely campy and ridiculous, and then try and take those same characters, that same structure, and elevate it again and say, what if Rocky IV, but serious and very good?
Right.
And that's what this is trying to do, and I don't think it quite pulls it off.
No, it gets close though. It does get close because there is some really good grounded stuff. I appreciate the sort of the two stories going on at once thing, but as you say, it would have been so much nicer if there was a little bit more balance towards the Drago side. So the story is, and getting into spoiler territory here, that Ivan Drago, of course, the villain of the fourth Rocky movie, was kind of shunned by the entirety of Russia when he lost to Rocky Balboa. And as a result, he raised his son, who was only a couple of years old at the time, same way that Adonis Creed was only a couple of years old when Drago killed his father, raised him in absolute hatred, essentially, and trained him to be a boxer. And the whole idea of him training him to be a boxer, this is Victor Drago, I mean, the son of Ivan, was to get revenge eventually for what Rocky had done to him and to sort of win their way back into the Russian, high society, let's say, or at least to, win back the people who they lost, who Ivan lost back in the day. And it, unfortunately, this to me would have been a way better story than what we got, which was Creed losing to Drago in the first place, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But he's also got the situation where he is very much in love with Bianca, Tessa Thompson's character, and proposes to marry her and eventually does marry her, and also has a child with her. And all that stuff gets a lot more attention than the Drago story, which to me was far, far, far more interesting. And I think if you manage to balance those two a little better, because I don't want to ignore the idea of, now Adonis has these responsibilities, and has to think about a family and a child that, may never know him if he gets as severely injured as he does in the first fight. I don't want to lose that. But I also really wanted to see more of the Drago story, and I think that's actually the more interesting story of the two.
Yeah, and I also think especially, and we'll just double up on the spoiler warning here because massive
Super
spoiler
spoilers.
warning. Where this movie ultimately ends up is centered around the Drago story because the end of the movie is Victor Drago is being pummeled in the fight, and Ivan Drago gets on the apron, and despite the fact that he knows what it's going to cost him and his son, throws in the towel to save his son.
Right.
Which is a nod back to Rocky IV when Rocky did not throw in the towel and ultimately cost Apollo his life.
Right.
So I think if that's the destination, if that's the end game, is you want that moment where he does this out of pure love for his son and decides that everything that happened to him, it's still worth it to save his kid. I think you need to do a better job of establishing their backstory, establishing what happened in that time. It's incredibly sparse. There's one scene at a diner where when Drago first comes over, where the Dragos first come over and challenge Adonis to the first fight.
Mm-hmm.
There's a scene in a diner between Rocky and Drago where Drago first basically says like, "Hey, I'm back, and my kid's gonna kick your boy's ass," and that is the moment where we get a lot of those details, where Rocky basically says like, "Why on earth are you doing this? Like, why now? Why this?" And Drago explains, "Losing that fight caused my entire country to turn against me. It cost me my relationship. It cost me my family.
Mm-hmm.
It cost me everything. I was outcast from society. I had to move to a different country." I believe they established that he actually moved to the Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken.
The opening sequence of the movie, and I was going to touch on that too, and that this is the great thing. The movie opens with the Dragos in Kiev, in the slums, and I'm thinking, wow, great, they're going to tell this story. And then they sort of forget about it for a while, and then they bring it back, and they forget about it for a while.
Yeah, so then they have that scene, and I was hooked from that scene. I thought that was an unbelievably great way
Dolph
to
Lundgren
reintroduce
kills
Drago.
that scene too. He was really, really
He really
good.
does, yeah. And then
which I never thought I'd say about Dolph Lundgren, by the way.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny because during that scene, I thought back to years ago. I saw a movie called JCVD at TIFF.
Oh yes, I remember JCVD.
And I thought the same thing. Like, oh yeah, that random like 80s 90s action star actually could act.
Mm-hmm.
In any event, so they kind of forget about Drago. They bring it back for a scene where they're at they've been embraced back by Russia basically after Victor pummels Adonis in the first fight, and there's Victor expresses his frustration with his dad over ever wanting to come back here, ever wanting the approval of these people who turn their back on him,
including his mother, who shows up at that dinner, by the way.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting. I thought that was another really cool character moment to have him say, like, why the fuck do you want these people's attention now? Look at what they did to us. I thought that was great. Yep. But then again, we just kind of forget about them until we get to the end fight, and then Ivan Drago does what he does, and it's like, I get all the moments, but you're basically making me fill in a lot of the dramatic stakes to get to where I think this is as good as it is. And I think if a better screenplay and a more economic use of time would have lent itself to establishing the Dragos more, showing more of their upbringing, showing more of what made them who they are, and then ultimately pays off in the ending. Because the ending, again, is a really great character moment.
Yes, absolutely. Ends on a very high note, which I appreciate. But yeah, I almost feel like it just needed a trim of some of the Adonis stuff, and that would have given more balance to the Drago story as well. We would have had shorter periods of time where we were without them. Because there are situations where, they come back and it's like, oh yeah, that's still going on over there.
So I know this is the stupidest possible complaint you could have about watching a Rocky movie, since they're basically what made this such a meme. But there are way too many montages in this movie. Victorious music, training montage. There are way too many of them. There don't need to be that many. You could have used time better here.
But we're not watching a Rocky movie. We're watching a Creed movie. And this should have been a Creed movie, and it was more of a Rocky movie.
I was just going to say that same thing. Unfortunately, we are watching a Rocky movie.
Oh, well, I mean, it's still a good movie. I'd still say it's very much worth watching, excuse me. And I think, we spent a lot of time talking about the negatives on here, but it's just that we had such high hopes for this movie, especially after the first one, that it felt like a little bit of a letdown. It's still fun. It's still a good entry in the franchise. I'd just like to see them do a little bit better next time if they are going to do another one, which I'm sure they will.
Yeah, exactly. It does bear repeating. This is a good movie. This is certainly not a bad movie.
Cromulent.
Yes, it's just Creed elevated the entire franchise back to this, Best Picture nominee. Well, not actual Best Picture nominee, but
should have been
that caliber of movie again. And then this kind of reverted it back to being more of just a Rocky movie again. And that's disappointing, but it's still a Rocky movie, and Rocky movies are really good and fun.
Even Rocky had a montage. Okay, so I think that does it for this episode. Let's talk about what we're going to talk next time. We're actually going to do something that I didn't think that we would get to do. And you and I talked about this on Michael Goldberg's Bar 42 podcast about a year ago now, probably. Maybe not quite that long ago. Netflix and feature films. We actually have some good things to say about some Netflix feature films, some Netflix exclusive feature films. And we're going to talk about those next time on the show. Ballad of Buster Scruggs is one of them, and a fantastic martial arts movie called The Night Comes for Us. And then a couple of movies that were kind of mediocre as well. So we'll get to all that next time. In the meantime, thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to us on Facebook and Instagram, Got a Minute Reviews. Head over to our website, gotaminutereviews.com, and watch us on YouTube as well. And we will catch you next time. Later.